Hi, folks. With Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about Ben Shapiro's comment, the US, I don't know what you call him, centre right, I suppose. He's very, very pro-Israel and pro-Jewish issues, but he's a bright guy, very, very sharp mind, and he's been around in the political commentary space for, got to be 10 years now. Now Ben Shapiro recently made a comment, say, look, if you're finding it tough in say, it's too expensive in New York City or wherever you are, then hey, that's just how it is. Too bad. Move somewhere else. The idea that you can expect or should expect the government to address issues of rapidly deteriorating circumstances where you live, that's too much to expect, and just move somewhere else where the situation is better or better for you or holds more advantages or opportunities and so on. I do understand that. I do sympathise with it. In the Western world, there's a lot of people move from, say, places like Britain, England to say the United States. Saying, well, the opportunities are better there. Now, the opportunity can be better in as much as there are more employment opportunities in your field, but also the purchasing power of your paycheck is considerably greater in America than it is in England. Also, you don't have class structures and things like that may restrict or limit your ability to get jobs or whatever. So moving around, has been, for those who have the get up and go and the pioneering spirit, the idea of moving from Western Europe to North America was always a case. In 1960s Britain, as things started to go a little bit stale, then there was a lot of, or even after World War II, people would, when there was still rationing in Britain, people would look at, British people, English people would look at, say, emigrating to the United States or Canada or Australia, New Zealand, and so on. There were plenty of places to go to that spoke English that had, more or less the same customs, habits, structures, legal structures, and where the qualifications, credentials you had in one country could be used and could be applicable elsewhere, such as in trades or in medicine, nursing, and in other accounting and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of portability. Now, the purchasing power of the paycheck in Australia was considerably greater than it was in Britain. So if you lived in the rural areas of England, say, the purchasing power you had there with your lower paycheck, your smaller paycheck, and so on, you could live in a big city in Australia and have that same standard of living, and you have access to all the facilities of the big city and so on. So the reality was that moving around could make a material difference. And if things had generally deteriorated or just weren't moving ahead, or simply that other places were better rather than the situation was getting worse where you were, then you could look at immigration. I remember in Australia there were a lot of adverts at the time saying, if you know someone in England who's thinking about coming to Australia, why don't you tell them how good it is in Australia and suggest to them maybe they'd like to come as an immigrant. Their skills can be used here, and maybe they're, I don't know, a carpenter or something. So it's very much a thing. Now, again, people weren't necessarily moving because things were bad and getting worse where they were, or they thought the government hated them, or the government was preferring black lesbians to them. Or so it wasn't. It's the opportunities were better. I can do better by going there, and they speak a language there. We've got the same religion, same capabilities, and same recognition of capabilities and qualifications and the like. So if I'm a carpenter from England, I can go to any one of those other countries, and my qualifications and credentials will be fully recognised. So it was a fairly easy well, I don't know, easy maybe is pushing it too much, but it was a fairly obvious thing to do. I can do better there. The purchasing power of my paycheck is 20% higher if I go to Australia or somewhere than if I stay in England. So it didn't mean things were necessarily bad in England. It just meant I could do better over there. This is a slightly different situation that Ben Shapiro is referring to. The purchasing power of the paycheck in the United States has been hurtling downward, and houses, rents, food, medical care, all of this sort of stuff is way more expensive than it was 50 years ago or 20 years ago, for that matter. And nor does it look like any government is interested in addressing the issue. Just again, as I've always pointed out many times, the price of rent and mortgages has increased 3.5 times, nearly 4 times now, faster than wages over the last 50 years, nearly 4 times faster. So the appreciation, the price rises, the inflation has gone up 4 times faster than wages. So that illustrates that it's just in the average wage, even though with an entry-level property like a 1-bedroom apartment in a just a middling to lower middling area, you're still going to take up 65% of the average wage to pay the fucking rent. Whereas the equivalent in the 1970s would have been somewhere between 15 and 18% of the wage would be taken up in that same property. So that just shows the extent to which purchasing power has been eroded. Now, coming back to Ben Shapiro's comment, just goes somewhere. Where do you go? Where do you go exactly? Because that's that real estate. The cost of living going through the roof, depressed wages. That's happening all over the United States. So exactly where do you go? Do you go to Canada or something? What's happening there too? Do you go to Australia? It's happening in Australia. Do you go to New Zealand? It's happening in New Zealand. Or maybe somewhere in Western Europe. It's happening all over Western Europe. So there's nowhere where you can go that's materially, the globalists have uniformly applied and instituted a globalist policy across all Western countries simultaneously. So the purchasing power of your paycheck isn't going to improve wherever you go. So you can't move somewhere else. Then you say, well, I can't afford New York, so I'll go and live in a rural area, but then the wages are much lower than are paid in New York. So are you materially improving your situation? If your wage is half as what it was in New York and your rent is half of what it was, have you actually improved? Now, certainly in the rural areas of Australia, any area above a small town is having the same inflation effect on property and rents and so on. So there's nowhere in Australia, if you say you want to get out of the big cities like Sydney or Melbourne, there's nowhere you can go to get an improved situation unless you're already independently wealthy with an independent income. Then you could lower your costs by moving to that area because you've got an income that's not dependent on your physical or geographical location. But just again addressing directly that comment of move somewhere else, that was the pioneering days. That's when you could emigrate to a place or an area or a country where the purchasing power of your paycheck was much greater. You can't do that anymore. Those options don't exist. So I don't think it's possible to move somewhere else and improve your circumstances, unless, for example, you've applied for a job that gives you a much bigger paycheck, for example. But that could be at the other side of the country or in another city. Then you move for that. I mean, there are those things. But those opportunities and the people it affects and so on are fairly rare. It's not that they don't exist. And those sort of jobs, the well-paying jobs, more and more now, all across the Western world, it's the cronyism jobs that are paying the money. It's the insider flunky gets paid $500,000 a year to be a diversity director and those sorts of things. And as I look on the job boards in Australia and elsewhere around the West, it could be Britain, could be anywhere, the best paying jobs now are globalist sort of jobs. They're some of the best paid jobs in universities now are jobs for you to turn out a placard waving mob on the street. Those sort of jobs are the ones that are paying very well. the jobs that really build and create or do something, they don't pay. They're not paying real. You know, the factory manager will be paid a quarter, of a big factory will be paid a quarter of what the diversity director is getting paid. So this idea of moving around and value and so on, until we return intrinsic value and merit to the Western economies, there won't be any opportunities somewhere else that you won't be able to just say, well, I'll move here and that situation will be better. That's not so. So I would say Mr. Shapiro is talking about another era, another time, not about the reality of the Western world today. You've been a Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.